Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jess Lenore here in Baltimore. We're joined by Mike Elk today. Mike Elk is a longtime labor reporter. He helps run Payday Report, which is a new online venture covering issues around labor all across the South. You just traveled 3,000 miles in the past few weeks across the South, and we're going to ask you about that. But let's start off by asking you about some breaking news. Here in Baltimore today, just a few hours ago, the Democratic mayor vetoed a $15 minimum wage measure. It had a number of exemptions, but I wanted to get your response to that. It would have lifted the wages of some 80,000 people in this city, which, as you know, just from driving through here, it's a city of opportunity, but it's marked with extreme inequality. People were hoping it would help bridge some of that inequality here.
Well, I think what a vote like this shows is that the corporate wing of the Democratic Party is still very much alive. A lot of people have said after the election that the Clinton wing is discredited, but here in Baltimore we're showing that they still have power, they're still trenched in, and they'll still take votes against workers' interests. And how disastrous is this in a state like Maryland, which is held by Republican Governor Larry Hogan, that the Democrats would come out against something like this? Obviously these kind of minimum wage laws, they're very, very popular among voters. Well over 60% in almost every opinion poll.
Including Maryland, too.
Yeah, and these folks, they're shooting themselves in the foot. What else do you run on unless raising people's wages?
And so I was at the press conference when the mayor announced her decision. I asked her, about the reasoning behind it, and she repeated the same talking points, which you hear from the business lobby across the country. Jobs are going to move outside. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt low-wage workers. They're going to lose their jobs. It's going to hurt ex-offenders. We kind of hear those arguments all over the country. And I asked her, where she got, who she consulted about it, because that hasn't panned out anywhere where they've raised minimum wages.
I'm not sure what studies you're looking at. I'm looking at Baltimore City, okay, and the fact that we are raising the minimum wage. It takes place July 1, and it'll take place again on July of 2018. So we are raising the minimum wage.
Well, it's absurd. Look, right down in D.C., they passed $15 an hour minimum wage. But when they tried to come out to the suburbs, to Montgomery County, the county council there passed $15 an hour, and then it was vetoed by the county executive, as well as many leaders from Prince George's County Democratic Party have been opposed to it. If D.C., just an hour down the road has $15 in minimum wage, what effect would it have on the suburbs? And instead of, the Democratic Party in Maryland getting together and having a coordinated strategy to go against and get all these counties, what they're now trying to do, many of the Democrats in the state legislature, is pass laws that forbid municipalities from raising their own wages. This is something we see Republicans doing all throughout the South and even in the North.
Yeah, you're talking about the preemption measure.
Yeah.
And Delegate Derek Davis introduced that measure in his committee. He's the chair of the Economic Means Committee, and he had to withdraw it because of the enormous protests and opposition he faced. But that is something that you see. It was part of North Carolina's bathroom bill. And more than, I think, almost 24 states, mostly Republican, have such measures across the South, mostly across the South and some northern states as well. And I wanted to ask you about your travels. You just, like we said, some 3,000 miles across the South. And we were actually both in Mississippi covering the Nissan.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was there too, covering the march of the Nissan workers. Bernie Sanders was there, Danny Glover, Nina Turner, other progressive voices. You were there. You talked to some of the GM workers there. Why do you think that's such an important struggle?
Really, and I think you would agree, I've never seen a march like the March on Mississippi. It's something that will stay with me for a very, very long time. Pulling up there, it was at this sports complex, and people crowded in these cars from all around, and it was lines and lines of cars outside of the facility. And then when you got in there were folks from all over the South who had driven down. They had heard Bernie was coming. They heard there was going to be a union march. And, this organizing drive at Nissan, starting wages for workers at that Nissan plant are $13.46 an hour. These are people making cars in the United States of America making $13.46 an hour, while also being required to work temp often. And that struggle there to organize them has been going on for 13 years. It's a very uphill struggle. The company always threatens to close the plant. Many people in the community put pressure on them. I was just down the road in Vicksburg a few days later, and a bunch of people said to me if they ever unionize that place, they'll close the plant. And what happens that we've seen in organizing drives in the South is that the community peer pressure has a big role in people voting anti-union. At Volkswagen, we saw the effect of peer pressure when there was hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on TV ads and billboards and sophisticated anti-union campaigns, and they lost the vote. In Boeing in South Carolina recently, just earlier this year, Boeing spent almost $500,000 on TV ads against the union. And what that does is it turns community members against the union, that if the people who work there vote for the union, it'll hurt the whole community. And what we saw in Canton was an ability to get outside of that box, to really tie the cause to unionize that Nissan plant to something much bigger. And that day marching, we were marching on the highway with 5,000 people. They were singing, we're ready, we're ready, we're ready, Nissan. It had an effect on me. You could really feel that the framework of a new coalition was being glued there on that highway as people walked along. And you could sense that the much bigger power this fight was having in the local community and its ability to really get the NAACP and groups like Sierra Club involved. Because we know in the South, no one union can win an election by itself. It really takes a community effort when you're fighting an effort in the community to destroy the union.
And just to put it in context, almost all of the Nissan factories around the world are unionized. Their factories in Brazil are unionized, but not in Mississippi. Talk about more about the challenges of unionizing in the Deep South. And Mississippi has some of the worst health indicators, for example, some of the worst standards of living, especially for African Americans who comprise the majority of these workers at the factory.
Well, there's 42 plants worldwide out of Nissan's 45 plants are unionized. There's 3 that aren't. The one there in Canton, Mississippi we were at, and then 2 in Tennessee. And what's interesting is that the 2 Tennessee plants are located closer to unionized plants. So those workers there make $15 an hour or more because of that kind of pressure. So obviously it shows you, just how much, the threat of labor, even unionized labor being close, has on workers. What we saw there is it's really devastating. I mean, you have people that are making cars living in poverty, not just living in poverty, but also working in unsafe conditions, especially temp workers that aren't trained in proper procedures. I just did a story in Alabama on a woman who was working as a temp in a Kia plant, and she was crushed by a machine. And she hadn't turned off the machine before working on it. She was instructed by her boss to go in and do this. So when people were working in these temp positions, and this is really a huge trend we see all across the South. I mean, Volkswagen just put in a new assembly line, and every worker they hired for that assembly line is a temp. And some of these people work for years. It has a real plantation mentality when people don't have permanent jobs working in factories.
All right, this wraps up part 1 of our conversation. Stay tuned to therealnews.com for our full conversation with Mike Elk.